The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine tarmac of Atlanta International Airport as Dr. Sarah Thompson pulled up to the private aviation terminal in her silver Mercedes. The clock on her dashboard showed 7:15 a.m., exactly 45 minutes before her scheduled flight to Boston. Sarah always made sure to arrive early. It was one of the many habits that had helped her climb to the top of her field. At 42 years old, Sarah had earned everything she had through hard work and determination. As the youngest chief medical officer at Phillips Pharmaceutical, she had transformed their research division and doubled the company's successful drug trials in just 3 years. Her crisp navy blazer and matching pants showed her polished professionalism, while her natural hair was styled in elegant twisted locks that spoke to her pride in her identity. "Good morning, James." Sarah smiled at the parking attendant she had known for the past 5 years. James tipped his hat with a warm greeting, just like he did every Tuesday when she flew out for important meetings. Sarah checked her leather briefcase one last time. Presentation files, laptop, chargers, and the documentation for her chartered flight were all perfectly organized. She had made this trip at least 50 times before, using the same private aviation company that many executives preferred for its reliability and service. The morning was unusually busy at the private terminal. Several other business travelers wheeled their carry-on bags across the polished floor, their voices echoing off the high ceiling. Sarah noticed a group of middle-aged white executives being waved through security with quick nods and minimal checks. This was normal at private terminals. Most regular customers were known to the staff. As she approached the security checkpoint, Sarah reached for her ID and flight documentation, holding them ready just as she always did. Her high heels clicked against the marble floor, the sound mixing with the quiet hum of conversation and the distant roar of jet engines. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Sarah could see her chartered jet being prepared for departure. The ground crew was running their final checks, and the early morning light gleamed off the aircraft's white and silver exterior. In less than an hour, she would be airborne, reviewing her presentation for the board meeting that could change the direction of cancer research at Phillips Pharmaceutical. Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from her assistant confirming that her car service would be waiting at Boston Logan Airport. She quickly typed back a thank you, then slipped the phone into her briefcase. The board meeting wasn't just another presentation. It was her chance to secure funding for a revolutionary new treatment protocol that could help thousands of patients. Looking up, Sarah noticed a new security guard at the checkpoint. His name tag read Richard Martinez, and something about his stance made her pause. Unlike the usual guards who maintained a professional yet welcoming demeanor, Martinez stood rigid, his eyes scanning the terminal with an intensity that seemed out of place in the usually relaxed private aviation environment. Sarah took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders, a habit she had developed over years of walking into rooms where she was often the only black woman present. She had learned to carry herself with a confidence that spoke before she did, to wear her accomplishments like armor against the prejudices she still encountered despite her position. As she walked toward the checkpoint, Sarah felt the weight of her father's words from years ago. "Excellence is your best response to ignorance." Her father, a civil rights attorney, had taught her to face discrimination with dignity and strength. The lessons had served her well throughout her career, though she had hoped they would be less necessary by now. Little did Sarah know that this ordinary Tuesday morning was about to become anything but routine. As she prepared to show her credentials to Martinez, she noticed his expression change, a subtle shift that she had seen too many times before. In that moment, Sarah's instincts told her to press the record button on her phone, a precaution she had learned to take after years of navigating spaces where her presence was sometimes questioned. The private terminal's usual calm atmosphere was about to be disrupted, and Dr. Sarah Thompson would soon find herself at the center of an incident that would not only test her resolve, but would ultimately lead to significant changes in private aviation security protocols across the country. Security guard Richard Martinez stood at his post, watching Dr. Sarah Thompson approach. His eyes narrowed as she reached the checkpoint, ignoring the polite smile she offered. Unlike the other travelers who had passed through moments before, Martinez raised his hand to stop her. "ID and documentation," he demanded sharply, not using the respectful tone he had shown to previous passengers. Sarah calmly presented her driver's license, passport, and flight documents, the same papers that other travelers had shown. "These could be fake," Martinez said loudly, drawing attention from nearby passengers. I need additional verification. He turned the documents over in his hands, studying them with exaggerated suspicion while other travelers watched uncomfortably. Sarah maintained her composure, though her heart was beating faster. Sir, I'm a regular client with Elite Air Charter. You can verify my identity with your supervisor or the flight company. Her voice remained steady and professional, just as it did during tense board meetings. Martinez ignored her suggestion. How did you get access to this terminal? He questioned, his tone suggesting she didn't belong. These private flights are very expensive. He emphasized the word expensive while looking pointedly at her designer briefcase and suit. Two white executives walked past, nodding to Martinez. He barely glanced at their papers before waving them through with a friendly, "Have a good flight, gentlemen." The contrast in treatment was obvious to everyone watching. Sarah's phone continued recording in her pocket as she pulled out her business card. I'm the chief medical officer at Philips Pharmaceutical. Here's my business card, and you can call our corporate office to verify my identity. She kept her voice level, though her fingers trembled slightly as she handed over the card. Martinez barely looked at it. Anyone can print business cards, he scoffed. I need to see your boarding pass again, and I'll need to check your luggage. Other guards had never searched her briefcase before, and she noticed no one else was being asked to open their bags. Several people had stopped to watch the scene unfold. A young flight attendant looked concerned and disappeared into an office, presumably to alert someone about the situation. An elderly couple shook their heads in disapproval at Martinez's behavior. Is there a problem here? A familiar voice called out. James, the parking attendant who had greeted Sarah earlier, had entered the terminal. He walked over with purpose, having worked at the airport for 15 years. Dr. Thompson is one of our most respected regular clients. Martinez turned red but stood his ground. I'm following security protocols, he insisted, though no other passengers had faced such intense scrutiny. She needs to prove she belongs here. Sarah took out her phone, now openly recording. I've shown you multiple forms of ID, my flight documentation, and my business credentials. Other passengers weren't asked for additional proof. I'd like to speak to your supervisor immediately. The guard's face darkened at the mention of recording. You can't film here, he said, reaching for her phone. That's a security violation. Actually, Sarah replied calmly, there's no such policy against recording in public areas of the terminal. I know because I checked with Elite Air Charter's policies last month. Her legal knowledge, picked up from years of corporate work, showed in her confident response. Other passengers had their phones out now too, some discreetly filming the interaction. Martinez noticed this and became more agitated. You need to step aside for additional screening, he insisted, his voice growing louder. Sarah stood her ground, her father's training kicking in. I will not step aside. I will stand right here while we wait for your supervisor. And I'll be calling my attorney, who will be very interested in reviewing this footage. The mention of an attorney caused Martinez to hesitate. Sarah could see the uncertainty creeping into his expression as he realized the situation was slipping out of his control. She had already pressed her attorney's speed dial number, ready to make the call that would change the course of this confrontation. Behind Martinez, the young flight attendant returned with a senior airport official rushing behind her. The morning sun through the terminal's windows illuminated the scene like a spotlight, and everyone knew this confrontation was about to reach its turning point. The senior airport official who arrived at the scene was Mrs. Patricia Chen, the terminal operations manager. Her quick steps and serious expression showed she understood the gravity of the situation. Behind her, several other staff members gathered, watching the scene unfold. What's the situation here? Mrs. Chen asked, her eyes moving between Sarah and Martinez. She had received an urgent call from the flight attendant about a possible discrimination incident, and the crowd of onlookers with their phones out confirmed her concerns. Before Martinez could speak, Sarah calmly held up her phone. I have the entire interaction recorded, Mrs. Chen. I started filming when I noticed Officer Martinez's unusual behavior. She played the video, which clearly showed Martinez letting other passengers through with minimal checks while subjecting her to excessive scrutiny. Martinez's face turned pale when he realized everything had been captured on video. She was being uncooperative, he tried to explain, but his voice wavered. I was just following security procedures. Which procedures exactly? Mrs. Chen asked sharply, because I've been running this terminal for 8 years, and I'd never seen any passenger treated this way. She turned to Sarah with an apologetic look. Dr. Thompson, I am so sorry for this experience. More evidence was emerging by the minute. A businessman in a gray suit stepped forward, holding up his phone. I recorded it too, he said. The discrimination was obvious. I've been using this terminal for 5 years, and I've never had to show more than my basic ID and flight documents. The elderly couple who had witnessed everything also approached. We saw the whole thing, the woman said. This young lady was nothing but professional while being harassed. We'd be happy to provide statements. Sarah's phone buzzed. It was her attorney, Michael Chen, returning her call. She put it on speaker. Michael, you're on speakerphone at the airport terminal. I have Mrs. Chen, the terminal operations manager, here with me. Mrs. Chen, Michael's voice was clear and professional. I'm sending you an email right now with relevant cases of discrimination in private aviation facilities. I suggest we handle this situation immediately to avoid any unnecessary legal proceedings. Martinez shifted uncomfortably as more phones emerged from the crowd. The flight attendant who had first reported the incident stepped forward with her supervisor. We have security camera footage as well, the supervisor added. And our company policy clearly states that regular clients like Dr. Thompson require only standard ID verification. Sarah stood tall, her composure unbroken. The morning sun through the terminal windows caught the gold name badge on her blazer, highlighting her executive status. Several of her regular flight crew members had gathered nearby, all ready to vouch for her frequent flyer status. Mrs. Chen took immediate action. Officer Martinez, please step aside. You're relieved of duty pending a full investigation. She turned to another security guard. Please escort Officer Martinez to HR immediately. As Martinez was led away, Mrs. Chen addressed the crowd. I want to thank everyone who recorded this incident. Your willingness to document discrimination helps us maintain the high standards we expect in this facility. She turned to Sarah. Dr. Thompson, please allow me to personally escort you to your flight. The other passengers began applauding quietly. The businessman who had recorded the incident stepped forward again. Dr. Thompson, I'm on the board of another pharmaceutical company. We need more executives like you who stand up against discrimination. Would you consider speaking at our next corporate retreat about this experience? Sarah's phone buzzed again, this time with messages of support from other regular travelers who had witnessed the scene. The video was already being shared with airport management and the private aviation company's corporate office. Mrs. Chen gestured toward the gate. Your flight crew is ready, Dr. Thompson. I'll make sure this incident is thoroughly investigated. She paused, then added, and I'd like to schedule a meeting with you and your attorney to discuss implementing new anti-discrimination protocols. As Sarah walked toward her gate, head held high, she thought about how her father had always taught her to stand up for what was right. Today, technology had helped her do just that. Her hidden camera had captured more than just discrimination. It had captured a moment of change, a moment when speaking up and standing firm had made a difference. The other passengers and airport staff watched her go with respect, knowing they had witnessed not just an incident, but the beginning of a necessary change in private aviation security practices. Attorney Michael Chen sat in his downtown office when Sarah's call came through. He immediately recognized the urgency in her voice, even though she remained calm. As one of Atlanta's top discrimination lawyers, he had handled many cases, but few clients showed the grace under pressure that Sarah consistently displayed. Send me the video right now, Michael instructed, already opening his laptop. Within minutes, the footage appeared in his inbox, along with several other videos from witnesses. He watched them all twice, his expression growing more serious with each viewing. Michael immediately set up a three-way conference call between himself, the airport's legal team, and Elite Air Charter's corporate office. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, I'm looking at multiple videos showing clear discrimination against Dr. Thompson, one of your most valued clients. The airport's chief lawyer, Barbara Reynolds, spoke first. We just received the security camera footage as well, Mr. Chen. This is completely unacceptable. Her voice carried both concern and determination. We want to resolve this immediately. While the lawyers talked, Sarah sat in a private waiting room that Mrs. Chen had arranged for her. The room had comfortable leather chairs and a view of the runway, But Sarah wasn't looking at the planes. Instead, she watched as messages of support flooded her phone from other regular travelers who had witnessed the incident. Dr. Thompson deserves more than just an apology, Michael continued on the call. We need immediate action and long-term changes. He listed his demands clearly: immediate removal of the discriminatory guard, a formal apology, compensation for emotional distress, and most importantly, new training programs and policies. Elite Air Charter's vice president joined the call. We want to make this right, she said firmly. Dr. Thompson has been our client for years. We're prepared to offer her lifetime premium membership and will implement new anti-discrimination training for all staff immediately. Sarah listened as Michael relayed these offers to her. It's not about the perks, she told him. I want real change. Make sure they implement body cameras for all security staff and create a review board that includes diverse voices. Michael smiled at her response. It was exactly why he had taken her as a client years ago. She'd always thought beyond herself, looking for ways to create lasting change. He turned back to the conference call. Here are our terms for resolving this situation today. The next 30 minutes involved intense negotiations. Michael's phone buzzed constantly with messages from civil rights organizations that had already heard about the incident. Local news stations were calling too, but Michael kept them waiting. His focus was on getting immediate results for his client. In the private waiting room, Sarah finally had a moment to breathe. She thought about all the times her father had represented clients in similar situations. Sometimes, he used to say, justice needs a little push from the law. She was grateful she had listened when he advised her to always keep Michael's number on speed dial. Mrs. Chen entered the waiting room with fresh coffee and an update. The guard has been officially terminated, she reported, and the airport director is on his way to personally apologize. She hesitated, then added, We've already started reviewing security footage from Martinez's previous shifts to check for other incidents. Outside the waiting room, a small crowd of supporters had gathered. Other business travelers, flight crew members, and airport staff who had witnessed the incident. They wanted to make sure Sarah knew she wasn't alone. Michael's voice came through on speakerphone again. Sarah, we have a preliminary agreement. The airport and Elite Air Charter have accepted all our terms. They're preparing the paperwork now. He paused, then added proudly, and they've agreed to create the review board you suggested. Sarah felt a wave of relief, not just for herself but for future travelers. Her father had always taught her that standing up for yourself meant standing up for others who might face the same situation. Today, that lesson had created real change. The airport director was walking toward the waiting room now, documents in hand. Behind him, television crews had begun to gather at the terminal entrance, but they would have to wait. First, there was important paperwork to sign. Paperwork that would help ensure no other traveler would face what Sarah had experienced this morning. The airport director, James Harrison, walked into the private waiting room where Sarah sat. His face showed genuine concern as he carried a thick folder of documents. Behind him, Mrs. Chen and two other senior airport officials entered the room, all looking serious and determined to make things right. Dr. Thompson, Harrison began, I've been airport director for 15 years, and I'm deeply ashamed this happened on my watch. He placed the folder on the table between them. These are the new policies we're implementing immediately. Sarah opened the folder and began reading, while Michael listened in on speakerphone. The changes were significant. Mandatory body cameras for all security staff, weekly anti-bias training sessions, and a new oversight committee that would include members from diverse backgrounds. We're not just making promises, Harrison continued. We're taking action right now. He turned to Mrs. Chen, who stepped forward with her tablet. On the screen, they could see security staff already being fitted with body cameras. In another area, workers were installing new signs displaying passenger rights and reporting procedures. Elite Air Charter's regional manager, Lisa Martinez, no relation to the fired guard, rushed into the room. Dr. Thompson, we've already begun our own changes, she announced, pulling out her own set of documents. Every security contractor at our terminals nationwide will go through new training by the end of this week. Sarah watched as more people sprang into action outside the waiting room's glass walls. Security staff were being gathered for immediate briefings. New signs were being hung. Even the coffee shop staff were being given impromptu training on reporting discriminatory behavior. The surveillance videos from Officer Martinez's previous shifts have been reviewed, Mrs. Chen reported, checking her tablet. We've identified 3 other potential incidents of bias. Those passengers are being contacted right now with apologies and compensation offers. Michael's voice came through the phone speaker. Sarah, they're exceeding our initial demands. The airport's response is setting a new standard for handling discrimination incidents. He sounded impressed, something Sarah rarely heard from her experienced attorney. Outside, the news crews were still waiting, but Harrison had another priority. Dr. Thompson, would you be willing to review our new training materials? We want to make sure we get this right. He showed her preliminary drafts of new security protocols that emphasize respect and equal treatment. Lisa from Elite Air Charter stepped forward again. We've also arranged something for your immediate comfort, she said. We've upgraded your flight to our largest private jet, and the entire crew has been briefed on what happened. They're eager to show you the respect you've always deserved. Sarah looked at the growing stack of documents, policy changes, and immediate actions being taken. This was more than just damage control. It was real, meaningful change happening in real time. She thought about how her father would have appreciated seeing justice move so quickly. There's more, Harrison added, turning to a new page in the documents. We're establishing a scholarship in your name at the Aviation Academy. It will help minority students enter aviation security management. We want to change the system from within. The terminal had transformed into a hub of activity. Through the waiting room windows, Sarah could see diversity trainers arriving with materials. Security staff were gathering in groups, receiving new instructions. Even the regular passengers were being given handouts about the terminal's new zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. Mrs. Chen's tablet beeped again. The security company that employed Martinez has just announced a complete overhaul of their hiring practices, she reported. They're asking for your input on their new screening procedures for potential guards. Sarah stood up, smoothing her blazer. Despite the morning's chaos, she looked as professional as ever. I'll help with the changes, she said firmly, but I still have a board meeting to attend in Boston. She turned to Harrison. Let's make sure this never happens to anyone else. Harrison nodded respectfully. Your new flight crew is ready whenever you are. And when you return, we'll have the first draft of our complete policy changes for your review. He gestured toward the terminal's windows, where Sarah's upgraded jet waited on the tarmac. Outside the waiting room, the atmosphere had changed completely. The tension from earlier had been replaced with purposeful energy as everyone worked to implement immediate changes. Sarah had turned a moment of discrimination into a catalyst for transformation. 1 week after the incident, Sarah returned to Atlanta International Airport's private terminal. The changes were immediately visible. New signs about passenger rights hung on the walls, security guards wore clearly visible body cameras, and the atmosphere felt noticeably different. The new head of security, Diana Williams, a highly qualified black woman with 20 years of military experience, greeted Sarah at the entrance. Dr. Thompson, your experience has changed everything here, she said, walking Sarah through the terminal. Let me show you what we've accomplished in just 7 days. They passed a training session in progress. Through the glass walls, Sarah could see security staff engaged in anti-bias training led by experts from a respected civil rights organization. The guards were actively participating, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions. We've completely rebuilt our security procedures, Diana explained, showing Sarah a new computer system. Every interaction is now recorded and reviewed. Guards must explain any additional screening requests to supervisors in real time. She demonstrated how the system tracked every security check to ensure fair treatment. Sarah noticed other changes too. The security checkpoint had been redesigned with clear signs explaining passenger rights in multiple languages. A dedicated customer service desk had been set up specifically for reporting any concerns about discrimination. Michael Chen, Sarah's attorney, joined them at the terminal. He carried a thick folder of documents. The impact has spread beyond this airport, he reported. 5 other major airports have already adopted similar policies. They're calling it the Thompson Standard for Security Protocols. Elite Air Charter's CEO had flown in specially to meet with Sarah. Our company has made significant changes, she explained. leading them to a private meeting room. We've hired diversity consultants to review all our procedures, and we're implementing new training programs across all our locations. The meeting room walls displayed the company's new anti-discrimination policies. Large posters showed clear procedures for reporting incidents, and every employee now wore a badge with a unique ID number for accountability. The most significant change, Diana continued, is our new oversight committee. She showed Sarah a conference room where 12 people sat around a table, a diverse group including civil rights leaders, aviation experts, and community representatives. They review every security incident report and help shape our policies. Sarah watched as a new group of passengers went through security. The difference was clear. Everyone received the same respectful treatment, with clear explanations for any additional screening needed. The guards were professional and courteous to all travelers. Your case has become a teaching example, Michael added, opening his folder. Law schools are already using it to show how quick, decisive action can create positive change. Several major companies have requested our guidance in updating their own security procedures. The elderly couple who had witnessed the original incident approached Sarah. They were traveling again and wanted to share their observations. It's like a completely different place now, the woman said warmly. Everyone is treated with such respect. A young black female pilot stopped to thank Sarah as she passed through the terminal. You've made our jobs easier too, she explained. The whole aviation industry is talking about what happened here. It's opening doors for more people who look like us. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message. It was from a national civil rights organization. They wanted her to speak at their annual conference about how one person's stand against discrimination had created widespread change. Similar invitations have been arriving all week. Diana led them to the security checkpoint where Sarah had faced discrimination just a week ago. Now, a new plaque hung on the wall, displaying the terminal's commitment to equal treatment and respect for all passengers. Below it was a QR code linking to the complaint reporting system. The best part, Diana said proudly, is that complaints have dropped to 0 this week. Our passenger satisfaction ratings have actually improved with the new procedures. She showed Sarah the latest feedback reports on her tablet. Sarah thought about how one difficult morning had transformed into something so positive. Her father had always taught her that standing up for your rights could help others, but seeing the real impact was powerful. As she prepared to board her flight, Sarah noticed a group of new security trainees watching her with respect. They had just finished their anti-bias training and were eager to show how much the culture had changed. The terminal had become an example of how quickly positive change could happen when people took a stand against discrimination. 1 month after the incident, Sarah sat in her office at Philips Pharmaceutical, reviewing emails from airports across the country. Each message detailed how they were implementing what had become known as the Thompson Protocols, the new security standards that her experience had inspired. Her assistant knocked on the door. Dr. Thompson, the governor's office is on line 1. They want you to serve on the state's new Transportation Equality Board. This was the 5th such invitation this week. Sarah's story had sparked a nationwide conversation about discrimination in private aviation. The morning news played quietly on her office TV. A reporter stood outside another private airport terminal. Following the Thompson incident last month, private aviation facilities nationwide are upgrading their security procedures. Today, Miami International's private terminal becomes the 20th facility to adopt these new standards. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Diana Williams, the new head of security at Atlanta's private terminal. You should see the place now, the message read, along with a photo showing the newly renovated security area. Clear signs about passenger rights hung everywhere, and the security staff reflected the diverse community they served. Michael Chen, her attorney, had scheduled a lunch meeting to discuss their progress. They met at a quiet restaurant near her office, where he spread out the latest reports. The changes are sticking, he said proudly. Not a single discrimination complaint at any facility that's adopted the new protocols. But there's more, Michael continued, pulling out a newspaper. The headline read, Private Aviation Industry Transforms After Thompson Incident. The article detailed how other transportation sectors were now looking to implement similar changes. Sarah remembered the fearful guard who had tried to block her that morning. His discrimination had unintentionally sparked a movement. She had heard he was now working at a warehouse, and actually written her a letter of apology after attending mandatory bias training at his new job. Her father called while she was reviewing the newspaper article. "Sweet pea," he said, his voice full of pride. "Your mother and I just flew through Denver's private terminal. You should have seen it. They got your recommended procedures posted right at the entrance. The security guard there couldn't stop talking about how you've changed things." Later that afternoon, Sarah visited Atlanta's private terminal for a scheduled meeting with their oversight committee. The difference from just a month ago was striking. The security staff was notably diverse, each wearing a body camera and a new uniform designed to appear professional but approachable. A young black girl spotted Sarah in the terminal and ran up to her. "My mom says you're the reason she got hired as a security supervisor," the girl said excitedly. "She says you made people see that everyone deserves respect." Sarah knelt down to speak with the child, remembering how much representation had mattered to her when she was young. The Oversight Committee meeting showed impressive results. Passenger satisfaction scores had risen by 40%. Other airports were sending their staff to learn from their procedures. Even private security companies were redesigning their training programs based on the Thompson protocols. Sarah's phone kept buzzing throughout the meeting. A major airline wanted her input on their security procedures. A security training company wanted to create courses based on her experience. A university asked her to speak to their aviation management students. As she walked through the terminal after the meeting, Sarah noticed a tour group of aviation security managers from across the country. They were taking notes and photos, learning how to implement the same changes at their facilities. The terminal had become a model for others to follow. Diana caught up with Sarah before she left. "Remember that storage room where you waited after the incident?" she asked, leading Sarah down a hallway. "We've turned it into our new training center." The room now had screens showing security procedures, signs about equality, and a plaque commemorating how one person's stand against discrimination had created lasting change. Outside the terminal, a camera crew was setting up for a national news feature about the changes in private aviation. But Sarah wasn't interested in more publicity. She was more focused on the message she had received from a small airport in Texas, asking for help in implementing the same changes. Real transformation was happening, one facility at a time. 6 months after the incident, Sarah stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., addressing a national conference on transportation security. The large hall was packed with aviation executives, security professionals, and civil rights leaders from across the country. "Change doesn't always come from big plans," she began, looking out at the eager faces. "Sometimes it comes from standing up in one small moment." The audience listened intently as she shared her story, now famous in the aviation industry. In the front row sat Diana Williams, who had traveled from Atlanta to present the impressive results of their new security protocols. Next to her was Michael Chen, Sarah's attorney, holding a thick folder of statistics showing how the Thompson protocols had transformed private aviation security nationwide. In just 6 months, Sarah continued, displaying slides on the large screen behind her. Over 100 private aviation facilities have adopted these new standards. The numbers were impressive. Discrimination complaints down by 95%, passenger satisfaction up by 60%, and security staff diversity increased by 200%. A video played on the screen, showing interviews with travelers and security staff from various airports. "I feel respected now," one passenger said. "The security checks are still thorough, but they're fair and professional." A security guard added, "We're better at our jobs because we learn to treat everyone equally." After her speech, Sarah visited the conference's exhibition hall. A booth displayed the new security training program named in her honor, the Thompson Standard for Aviation Security. Security companies from around the world were signing up to implement these training materials. Her phone buzzed with a message from her father. He had just landed at a small private airport in Texas and sent a photo of their security checkpoint. "Look familiar?" he wrote. The image showed the same clear signs about passenger rights, body cameras, and diverse staff that had started at Atlanta's terminal. Later that evening, at a dinner honoring pioneers in aviation security, Sarah sat with the elderly couple who had witnessed the original incident. They had become active advocates for change in their own community. "You turned a terrible moment into something beautiful," the woman said, holding Sarah's hand. The former guard, Martinez, had sent a letter that arrived that morning. Your stand that day didn't just change airport security, he wrote. It changed me. The bias training helped me understand my prejudices. I'm now working with youth groups to teach about equality. Sarah's phone kept receiving updates from airports across the country. A small private terminal in Montana had just installed their body cameras. An airport in Florida had completed their staff diversity training. A facility in California had appointed their first diversity and inclusion officer. The conference organizers presented Sarah with an award, but she was more proud of another achievement. The scholarship program she had started for minority students entering aviation security had just graduated its first class. All 15 graduates had already received job offers. Diana shared some news during dinner. Remember that little girl who thanked you because her mother got hired? Her mom just got promoted to regional security director. She's overseeing implementation of the Thompson protocols at 12 different facilities. As Sarah prepared to leave the conference, a young security guard approached her. Dr. Thompson, she said shyly, I applied for this job because of your story. Now I'm helping train other guards to be fair and professional to everyone. Outside the conference center, a group of aviation security students waited to meet her. They were studying the Thompson case as part of their training. You showed us that one person can change an entire industry, one student said. You made us want to be part of that change. That night, as Sarah packed for her flight home, she reflected on how much had changed in 6 months. What started as a frightening confrontation had transformed into a movement for equality in aviation security. Her father had always told her that standing up for what's right could change the world. He just hadn't mentioned how quickly those changes could happen. As her car approached the airport the next morning, Sarah smiled at the new sign welcoming travelers. We proudly follow the Thompson standard, equal respect, equal security for all. The guard at the checkpoint greeted her professionally, wearing a body camera and a badge showing he was Thompson Protocol certified. The incident that could have left her bitter had instead become a catalyst for positive change. As Sarah boarded her flight home, she knew that somewhere, at another airport, another traveler was being treated with the respect they deserved. And that made everything worthwhile.